All right, what's going on, everybody? I'm back. So I just want to give a quick shout out to everybody who gave me feedback on last week's episode. That was awesome. I think I learned a lot from that episode. I'm watching this guy, and he's saying that, you know, you gotta learn from your mistakes, right? Well, I mean, we all know that. It's not necessarily that I'm watching it from this guy. It was a reminder, rather, right? It's a reminder that you gotta learn from your mistakes. So some mistakes were made in the last video. I won't make the same ones, hopefully again. So last week we talked about fathers, right? It was like a post Father's Day episode. So I decided to make that kind of like a part one, sort of, right? It's not necessarily a series what I'm getting into, but I want to talk a little bit more about fathers. I think they're pretty important, obviously, right? I mean, just as important as mothers and whatnot, but again, I'm not going to get into that right now. So one thing I noticed that I did is I broke down my stepdad a lot last episode, which isn't a problem. I meant to do that, but one thing I did forget to do was to explain how our relationship has evolved into the beautiful thing that it is now. For example, like last episode, I was talking about how, my dad, we're not talking about biological father, okay? We are not talking about biological father right now. That's gonna be a whole other thing, if it's even gonna be a thing, okay? I'm talking about stepdad. So that's my dad, right? Well, I talked about how he couldn't get a job for a while. He wasn't very emotionally connected, not super supportive in a lot of ways, right? As far as like household goes and like being a dad. And I talked about how hard it must have been to ultimately become the father of two children that aren't yours. And then eventually, like, he had my sister, right, with my mom. Now, one thing's for sure is our relationship since then has evolved beautifully, right? Because going through those, my own phases of maturity that I was talking about last time, I've discovered that through my own lessons, that he was going through his own lessons and his own experiences, and he was trying to figure out, who he was going to be and how he was going to be, and just finding himself ultimately, right? Well, basically, I got to a point at like 21 years old where I sat down with him and I let him know that I loved him, right? I let him know that I appreciated him. And I did the same thing with my mom, but I told him that, I appreciate him being a father, being my father specifically, right? Not just being a father, but being my father. And, because after a while he did get a job. He got quite a few great jobs. And he actually had them for a long time. He's one hard-working man. I'll tell you that. If I got something, which is one of the things I got from my mom and my dad, and is how to work hard. And I can't be appreciative enough for that. But so he ended up obviously getting a job, and he was working. He was supporting, and then he had my sister with my mom, and and eventually everybody grew up, right? We all have grown up now since then. And so our relationship is obviously gotten a lot better. And it kind of brings me to what I want to talk about in this next episode is, again, good and bad men was kind of what I was talking about last time. I know I really dove into like the father aspect of it, and that really had to do with it being Father's Day. And just for the fact that I feel like they play such a big role. There's other things I talked about, like values and beliefs and phases of maturity, which I think are probably going to be later episodes in my podcast. I think that's I keep calling it a podcast. Ultimately, it's a podcast because you're listening to me, or you listen to a podcast, right? But I mean, there's the video aspect of it too. So YouTube channel, I don't really know what to call this. It is just kind of what it is. I have plans for what I want to do and what I want to talk about, but ultimately I'm hitting record and I'm just jumping into it. So I appreciate all you guys bearing with me. But so I've got this book here, and this is what I was going to get into. So this book is called Iron John. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that. I'm sure you will. It's a book about men. So this book is fascinating. I actually got it I bought it myself, but I got it recommended from my buddy Iman. So he recommended this to me. He recommended this book to me like 2 years ago, and I ended up starting it like a year ago, and I finished it maybe 4 months ago. So it took me a good 8 months, 9 months to really read the book, which I'm not proud of, but I did it. I finished it, right? Well, this book is about men. It's about the evolution of masculinity, right? It's actually where I learned a lot of my well, I shouldn't say learn them. It's helped me develop my perspectives on being a man, as well as my perspectives on my dad and my biological father and my brother, and just how I kind of perceive masculinity. And it's really helped me evolve away from toxic masculinity. It discusses a lot about how and why we have so much toxic masculinity in our society, mainly in America. But he kind of briefly talks about, just as a world, why we have so much. But one thing that I want to take from this book and kind of incorporate here is he says that so you have your dad, right? Let's say you have a dad, whether it's just bear with me, right? You have a dad, a man who is a dad, okay? Not yours, not mine, just a dad, right? And you have he's a good guy, okay? And so in your mind, you build this space for him, right? And it's a good space because he's a good guy, right? Now, maybe one day he does something bad, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like how could you do this, right? And and then so there we are, and we have another one here where we have a bad father, right, or just a bad guy, right, who happens to be a dad, okay? And he is just this bad guy, so you built a bad space for him, right? A real negative space. And imagine them as houses, right? So you've got this good house and this bad house. And in the good house, you've got, nice silverware and really nice couches and like a big plasma or flat screen TV, or I guess LED TVs now they are, right? Plasma, what year am I in? I don't know. So you've got all this cool stuff. He's got a backyard with a pool, and it's a 2-story house, right? It's just amazing, right? And then you've got this bad house. It's like a trailer, right? And I'm not knocking trailers, maybe, but so you've got this trailer, and it's got no artwork in there. He has like one of those old box TVs, with the back, and it's kind of staticky. It's got an antenna. You can only get like the news and PBS. So you've got this bad house, right? And the most of the lights don't work, and maybe he's got cockroaches, I don't know. And so, anyways, you got these houses, right? Good house, bad house, for your good father and for your bad father, right? And so basically what Robert Bly talks about in this book is he says that when that happens and the good father does something bad and the bad father does something good, you don't really know how to handle it. You don't know how to accept it, handle it, and process it. Which are all kind of go hand in hand. Ultimately, they're kind of the same thing. But so he says it's important if you have like this good house, that even though maybe your dad or your father or just this man, right, hasn't done anything bad, you have to build the bad house for him to exist in, even if he never lives there. Okay? So he lives in this good house, he's always doing good stuff, but when he does something bad, he kind of moves over into this bad house. You have to have already pre-created this space for him to live in order for you to really understand, process, accept, and move on from him doing a bad thing. And same thing goes for the other guy, right? The guy who lives in the bad house and he does something good. You have to have already created these opposite houses in order for you to really process the actions that come with them, right? And so I find that interesting because, like I said before, I got my stepdad who's amazing, right? He's just an amazing guy. And then I've got my biological father, and I'm not gonna say he's not an amazing guy, but I did say that I learned everything in my life, or what not to do with my life, rather, in my actions, from my biological father. And sure, I learned some things not to do from like from my dad, but that's besides the point. The point is, like, it was like, hey, Ethan, do you need an example, of what not to do with your life? Here's your biological father. Just don't do what he did. So that's kind of what I'm saying when I say that. So anyways, so I built these houses, right? So now we're taking it from my perspective. So I built these houses for my dads, right? I have a mom. Okay, I do, but when I say my dads, it sounds like I have just two dads that raised me. That's not what's happening here. So I've got my biological father, I've got my stepdad, right? And again, remember on the last episode, I talked about how initially I didn't really like bond with my stepdad just because I wasn't used to the way that he was kind of raising me, like with the discipline, right? And all these other factors, the lesser emotional connection, which was fine because I got it from my mom, that emotional connection. But again, so I kind of built bad houses for both of them, like mentally, right? So I built these bad like headspaces where they both existed. They were separate because they're not the same person, like by far, right? But they still existed in these separate headspaces, and they both were bad. And so we'll skip ahead, and I read this book, and I started thinking about it. And so for my dad, right, my dad who raised me, I had already just unconsciously built a better house for him, another one for him to live in, because we had already just naturally developed this better relationship. As I got older and he got older, we just created something totally new together. So we got this whole other house, and so I already kind of did that with him. I just was unconscious of it, right? I had no idea that I did that. It just happened naturally, right? Which is how it's kind of supposed to, but sometimes you gotta do it yourself, right? You have to put the conscious effort into building another headspace for a person to exist within your own mind in order for them to not be the person that you always thought they were, right? And so for my biological father, I mean, obviously he's in prison. He did some stupid stuff, right? I just won't disclose what he did because it's just, it's whatever, right? It's not whatever, but I'm not going to talk about it. So point being is that I built a really bad house. Like, we were talking about like a trailer earlier. I may have built like a shack that, just like no electricity. Like my man's here was like building fires outside just to like survive, right? Like I built a really bad place for him to exist in my mind. And granted, he kind of earned that, right? See, my stepdad is a little different. He didn't necessarily earn a bad spot. I was just a kid and I created that for him, right? My biological father, however, on the other hand, earned a bad place in my memories and in my consciousness, right? He earned that position by doing what he did as a father, right? Or as a man in general. But obviously from my perspective, the relationship I have with him as a biological father. So I read this book and I found it fascinating because what sprung the idea to me to build a better house or a better headspace for my biological father was that I had realized by reading this book, Iron John, that I had already did it for my stepdad. So it's like, if I did it for my stepdad just naturally, and maybe I'll just do it for my biological father too, just to give him another opportunity to be a person. So yeah, hold on. Just gotta check that real quick, make sure that's still in focus. So last thing I want to do is lose the video. So anyways, and as I'm going here, we're going to cut for a second and we'll get back to it. Just give me a moment here. Hopefully that audio is a lot better now. I'm sure it started off a little foggy. But so back to what I was saying. So what initially sprung the idea to create this better house or better headspace for my biological father came from the idea that I did it naturally for my stepfather, right? So we've established that now. So I did this, right? And I did it, and we'll kind of see where it goes. This happened very recently for me, creating this new like positive headspace for my biological father. That happened very recently. So we'll kind of see where that goes, and sometime down the road, I'll further explain that. But so I just wanted to kind of give you the idea that I got from this book of, the good house and the bad house, and and how they're opposites, right? You've got good and you've got bad for each person. This is for each person, and this really goes into, just about anybody in your life. You've got your significant others, you've got, your mom, you've got siblings, this friends, anybody. You can really do this for everybody. And it's pretty important to at least realize what kind of headspace you've already created for somebody, and then maybe you'll realize that you've already had both. You've already created both unconsciously or subconsciously rather. Regardless, they're basically the same thing. And so you'll kind of realize that, and maybe you've already did that. I think it'll take you a little bit of a step or two further in your own personal development, as well as maybe it'll better the relationship you have with another person. So I think it's important that you guys do that, because it actually did wonders for me and my wife, and even my dog. My dog is amazing, but so you just got to realize all these things for everybody, anything that you want, right? And ultimately, it doesn't even have to just be people, okay? So I wanted to get into a little bit of something else as far as this book goes. So there's different phases that a man goes through in life, right? And women too. Everybody goes through these phases, right? But ultimately, everybody goes through their own phases. You get to about 10, maybe 11, 12, and that's kind of when you hit puberty, right? Most people hit puberty around that age. You got those late bloomers that don't hit it till 19. You got those early bloomers that hit it at 7. I mean, again, they're both kind of rare cases, but it happens. So generally, everybody hits puberty around 10 to 12, 10 to 13, and you start there, right? Ultimately, from newborn to 10 years old, you're completely in your parents' hands. For those of us that have, blessed have been raised with parents, right? Or at least a parent, and I mean, there's foster parents, but, I'm not speaking on any special situation, or unfortunately, I just don't have that, perspective. I'm talking about people who had step parents, a parent, grandparents, somebody who raised them, right? That's what this is. It's somebody who raised them. So you generally from newborn to 10, you're just at mercy of the world, of elementary school. You guys all remember elementary school for yourselves, right? I mean, you're just this absorbent little kid, and you're just doing whatever, and you got no cares, no worries, you're just doing whatever, right? And being pain in the butts to our parents. So once you hit about 11, right, 10, 12, you start hitting puberty, things really start to shift for you. It's a big, mental, physical shift, right? People's voices start changing. When, men specifically, when their voice changes, I can't even tell you how and that's what is funny, is we've kind of shamed it almost. We've shamed puberty. We make fun of voice cracking and facial hair. You make fun of these things growing up, right? Because it's just I guess it's a social norm, right? It's just this thing. But I can't tell you how embarrassed I was when my voice cracked. I was in 5th grade, so I started, I guess, puberty at 10. That's when my voice first cracked, and it started getting deeper. I was standing in a lunch line, going from lunch to recess, right? Which is weird, why they let you go play outside right after you eat. It's just asking for you to throw up, right? Well, I go outside, and I'm standing in this line, and I don't remember if we were saying our names or if we were just saying line up, but I remember yelling something, and my voice just cracked, just, whoa, and everybody looked at me, and I just remember my face getting hot, which, basically means it's getting red. And everybody starts laughing at me, and it became this whole thing. But I don't know, I think it's kind of funny how society has shamed, ultimately, puberty and being a person. We're so detached as humans nowadays. But I'm saying that as you guys are watching my digital video. But, I don't know. There's a balance. I mean, obviously our world is changing. It's evolving. It's just, oh my gosh. They're the neural chip, right? Putting chips in our brains, and, the technology where you put the very thin sheets of metal on your arms, sleeves, right? And over your head as helmets, very thin helmets. And you can control your phone and your TV and all this stuff using the electromagnetic frequencies from your body. And oh man, our world is changing, that's for sure. But so with that being said, I think there's a balance between being attached and but still or being detached, but allowing yourself to kind of indulge a little bit in technology, because technology is such a useful tool. And man, I am going off on a tangent, but I mean, come on, you guys can't disagree with me on technology. I mean, sure, some people may think like hippies, like how I used to think, and I'm not saying hippies are bad, because man, if I don't have a hippie mentality, then I don't know what I'm doing. I love hippies, or the mentality at least, but you gotta love technology for what it is. It's a tool for mankind to use to just, evolve. You know what I mean? Who knows what we're gonna be in 10 years, 20 years? If we don't get our crap together with the environment, I mean, we're gonna be dead. So I guess we better figure that out. Well, most people have, or a lot of people have figured that out. Nobody's just really doing anything about it. But, so I got really off topic there. I apologize. Now, we're going to go way back here. I said I wanted to talk about another concept from Iron John, the book, right? So one of the things men go through when they grow up, right? So we're gonna kind of skip past. We're not gonna go. I won't go in order. And it's primarily, and I think I said this in the last episode, I won't go in order on these phases of maturity, because like I said before, you can be like 55 going through the same phase of maturity that I'm going through at 23, right? Or like I knew guys in high school that seemed much older than they really were. We all looked the same age, but like they seemed much older. And I know guys now that are like in their 30s that seem like they're younger than me. And I just, you can be a certain level of mature at any given age in reality. So there's no order for this to kind of go in. I'm just, we're just gonna kind of get into each phase and to kind of explain experiences that I've had being with these phases. And so the phase that we'll talk about today is living with ashes, or there's different types of, there's different translations on this. There's living with ashes, which Iron John talks about. There's eating cinders, which are basically ashes. They're burnt pieces of something, mostly wood. There's working with ashes, right? There is sleeping with ashes, right? So there's these different translations. And ultimately it means that you're low. You're at the bottom, right? So this is after the fire has burned and it exposed its beautiful flames to the world, and this is leftover. This is the aftermath. This is where you come in, right? This is where, the guy comes in that's got to clean it up, but here's the trick. Not only do you have to clean it up, but you have to live in it, right? You've got to eat it, and you've got to sleep there. Well, I guess both of those things kind of come with living with it, but that's the point here, right? You're sleeping on ashes, you're eating burnt up pieces of wood. That's all you have. It's called being low. It's called understanding and knowing the grind, right? It's work, understanding work, getting your hands dirty, right? Putting calluses on your fingers and your palms, maybe breaking fingers, getting cut up, just getting dirty and grungy, just getting down in there, right? And so I've had a couple of different experiences that I would say I was living with ashes or working with ashes. So back when I lived in Texas, I worked for a company called HEB, right? It's a grocery company. It's much like up here in the northeastern part of the U.S. It's like Wegmans, or I guess, and then there's like southeast. I don't know. I think Kroger is somewhere like south, like maybe in like Georgia and then Louisiana area. I'm not familiar, but just imagine a giant, or like Walmart, right? Like Walmart, but only groceries. Okay, Walmart just only groceries. Okay, or like a Target with only groceries. Or like not a super Target or regular Target. I'm getting off topic. So I worked for HEB Warehouse. Okay, so I worked for their warehouse department, which basically means I'm on this machine, and it's battery powered, and it's hand controlled, and it weighs about 2 tons, and it can mess somebody up, right? Well, you basically you put these pallets, right? These wooden pallets. I don't know if you guys have ever been into like a department store or grocery store late at night, where they have like stacks of boxes and they're all saran wrapped up. That's a pallet of products, right? So my job with HEB Warehouse was to build those pallets of products. And excuse me. it went from, that was a burp. It went from a range of things like produce to, gosh, I don't know why I'm blanking on anything but produce. I mean, there was like milk. that's produce, isn't it? Groceries. Anything you'd buy at a grocery store. Okay, I'm building pallets of that, right? I mean, crackers, all kinds of stuff, whatever. You know what I mean? It's stuff at a grocery store. I'm building pallets, and I worked at this job for like 5 or 6 months, and it sucked. You know, my wife and I were just boyfriend and girlfriend at that time, right? I lived in my first apartment, and I was making decent pay. So in Texas, minimum wage was like $7.25 or $7.50 back then, and I was making like $14 an hour, so almost, basically twice minimum wage in Texas. So I was doing okay. I was making good money. Brianna that's my wife's name. She had a job. She was doing all right. She was in school. I was in school. Like, everything was fine, right? Except for the fact that I was working from 4 in the afternoon to 4 in the morning. Just to work, not technically a graveyard shift, but it really rolled over into the graveyard shift, right? And I just had no personal life. Like, it was really hard to maintain school. I couldn't go to the gym, so I was getting fat. I wasn't able to see my girlfriend at the time, so it was just, it sucked. I was making good money, but at what cost? I lost so much time working there because I'm getting home at 4, which means I'm eating at like 4:30, 4:45. I'm going to bed by 5:30 after I shower and eat, and I'm comfortable enough to like lay down and go to sleep, and then I'm sleeping until noon and 1. So I have. And then, I lived about an hour away, so, I have to leave at 3 o'clock. So I have like 2 hours, if Brianna wasn't working, for me to spend time with her. It was terrible work-life balance, right? Yeah, work-life, right? Work and personal life balance. It was terrible. It was awful, So I worked there for a while. I was also a server at Olive Garden, which wasn't a bad gig, but, there's no guaranteed paycheck. You're working right off a tip. So for all my servers out there, I feel for you. I know how hard it is. Because you just, you're out there, it's, you get the worst, man. Serving sucked. You could serve real well, but the people could just not have the money to tip you or just not want to tip you, and then boom, just like that, you spend an hour and a half, 2 hours serving a table and you didn't make any money. So serving was stressful. There was the pros and cons to serving, just like there was with HEB, and I was a busser for a little while. Which is basically what, if you guys don't know, you're the ones that clean the tables after people finish eating at restaurants. So I was doing that for a little while, and working these types of jobs really made me appreciate where I'm at now. And now I'm in the Navy, and I basically have a guaranteed paycheck. I do my job. I've given up some things like where I live, like the say in where I live, and for the most part in like what job I do, even though I kind of chose the job that I wanted, but ultimately I've given up a lot of things, but it makes me really appreciate the situation I'm in now, and even the situation I was in right before I joined the Navy. So right before I joined the Navy, I was working at the vitamin shop, right? I don't know if you guys have ever been to like GNC, but it's just like GNC but better. It's got so much more. So for all you out there who like going to GNC, go to the vitamin shop. So anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. And maybe appreciate those. Okay, working these crappy jobs really made me appreciate working the kind of guaranteed paycheck, the hourly paid jobs, and I just had a better work life, right? Like even now I have a better work life. I don't know, and I've come a long way. So working with ashes, living with ashes, I'm metaphorically from the book, right? I learned to not take my situation for granted. And that was probably one of the biggest lessons, is, man, just don't take the situation you're in right now for granted. Don't waste the time that you have. So the point I was making, like with the HEB job specifically, was I only had basically 2 to 3 hours of free time outside of sleep, if I wanted to get 6 to 7 hours of sleep, right? And I barely got to see my girlfriend. Now she's my wife, which honestly I'm just so grateful for. and happy about, but lost my train of thought here. Oh, so just appreciate the time that you have. Appreciate your situation. Don't take it for granted. Don't waste it. You've only got now. You can plan for tomorrow and plan for all this, but you don't have it, right? And that's not the big message for the day. That's just kind of, in there. Actually, we will make that the big message today. I like that message. Don't take your situation for granted. Stop wasting time. Go do something with yourself. Start a conversation with somebody. I'm telling you guys, man, what is there to live for if not conversation? I mean, a lot of things, right? I'm expressing my gratitude for being able to converse with people, right? It's just, man, I don't know, I love all you guys for watching these videos, and I appreciate it. And I want you to keep doing it, especially if you like them, and continue to give me feedback on them. But so just for a quick recap here, we discussed the brighter side of, having my stepdad as my father. We went over a little bit on the good and the bad headspaces or houses, metaphorically, to build for one another. Fathers, mothers, siblings, friends, yourself. Oh my gosh, yourself, everybody, all right? You got to have a good and you got to have a bad, and you got to have those headspaces, good and bad. And you got to allow them to coexist, right? Because they're necessary. Now you're not going to always be in one or the other, or you're not always going to be in the good house. Sometimes you'll shift over to the bad house. Sometimes you're going to be in one more than the other, and that can go into other things like karma. That's a good one. I think I'm going to talk about karma next week. But so we talked a little bit about the good house and the bad house. Again, Iron John, a book about men. Dude, if you're a man, honestly, if you're anybody and you want to learn a little bit about the masculinity energy and the way that it has changed from the 50s, check out Iron John. I highly recommend it. Or if you just want some insight on the book and some other stuff that I learned from it, I'm sure I'm going to talk a little bit more about this book for sure. You can even ask me about it personally. But I will put a link in the description box for that book specifically. If you guys want to check it out, I'll link it to probably Amazon, because that's where I got my book. But so with that being said, we've kind of stepped into phases of maturity. The only one I really discussed today was the living with ashes. It's a big one. It's a big one. Ask me about it. We can talk more about it. I want to talk to you guys about it. I don't like to make these videos too long. I want to get your attention and utilize it while I have it. I don't want to waste your time, So next week we'll probably get into karma and peaks and valleys. I touched a little bit on peaks and valleys today. We're just being low, really. And obviously there's an opposite. Like I said earlier, good and there's bad, right? Just like there's a low, there's always going to be a high, okay? You don't live in the low forever. You don't live in the high forever. You move back and forth between the two. So next week we'll talk about valleys, talk about karma, probably some other stuff. I've actually got a big surprise for you guys coming up pretty soon. So tune in next week. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like the video if you did. If you didn't like it, don't like it. Subscribe to me. Check me out next week. You guys are awesome. Spread that love.